Hello everyone, my name is Elaine, and I want to welcome you to my Unison League Rook's Guide Part 1. This will help you grow accustomed to the game and give you some advice on the Rook class. The Rook is one of Unison League's extra classes. The devs classify the Rook with the following words. This class has the features of a soldier, but specializes in defense, and has the ability to protect allies. I would classify the Rook as the soldier and cleric's not-so-secret love child. They easily outclass soldiers as the game's tank, but haven't quite caught up to the cleric in terms of healing capability. Even so, there are several wonderful utilities and support abilities in the Rook's arsenal, which make them a powerful support class with some DPS capabilities, although DPS is not their main focus or specialty by any stretch of the imagination. They are a tank first, a powerful ally meant to take the brunt of attacks and protect and support their allies first, and a DPS in a far distant second. Unlike every other class in the game with any DPS capacity, the Rook's damage output is determined predominantly by a combination of their defense stats, as opposed to their attack stats or some combination of their attack and defense stats. Therefore, in order to make the most out of their damage dealing capabilities, you'd want to emphasize both their armor and helmet gear, while using their monsters for extra stats and support. The high emphasis you'd give your character on their defensive stats would also bolster their ability to perform as a tank and keep everyone on their team safe. However, their ability to use some of their healing and support utilities, which require higher magical attack stats to perform at their peak, would suffer. So this is something to keep in mind when building your character. Furthermore, building a tank character in a traditional sense, if you will, makes it far harder for you to multi-class, since the majority of the game's classes require high attack stats and an emphasis on weapons and monsters in order to perform well. Building a tank by predominantly emphasizing your defensive gear will make it harder for you to transition to these classes unless you are willing to use materials to restat. This is definitely something you should keep in mind when building your character. As someone who has done this, I would not suggest building the ideal tank unless you just want to play a tank class, because if you try to transition off the class you chose and built your character for, it's rough, or you wind up with a character that's really bad at everything but support. But ultimately, the choice comes down to you and your preferences and play style. Before I move into my review and discussion of each of the Rook's abilities, I wanted to take a moment to discuss the passive boosts that are awarded to this class. In the first ring, Rooks receive boosts to both the magical and physical attack of books and swords, a magical defense buff to their hat and clothing gear, a boost to the physical defense given by their helmet and armor gear, some stat sticks, a reduction to the unison damage they receive, as well as a reduction to the damage they receive from berserkers. In the second ring, they receive boosts to both the magical and physical defense they receive from helms, armor, hats, and clothing gear they're wearing, boosts to the magical and physical attack of the swords and books they have equipped, and some more free stat sticks intended to raise their defensive capabilities. A quick glance at these passive boosts makes it clear that it'd be easiest to transition to this class if you chose to begin your gameplay as either a soldier or cleric, because the gear these two basic classes receive the most passive boosts from are the same as the Rook. Furthermore, the traditional build for each of these three classes is most similar to one another. Thus, I would say to make the ideal Rook, you'd emphasize your defensive gear using your monsters to aid your stats. I would emphasize magical attack over physical attack in the case of a Rook to help get the most out of their healing support abilities. Again, making the ideal Rook would make it more difficult to transition to a DPS class later, since their builds are so different, so keep this in mind when creating your character. Now that you know a bit more about the Rook, its purpose, and basic build, I want to take some time to talk about their non-passive abilities. If you've watched my other class guides, you already know that I have a typical format for these videos, but I'm going to change things up today. Instead of suggesting sets, I'm going to discuss each ability, giving you my thoughts on it, allowing you to find the best set for your specific build and playstyle. For sake of ease, I'm going to be discussing the unenchanted version of each of the following abilities. Now I'm going to jump right into things, starting with the Rook's first ring, the Rook. First up on the docket is Devoted Sacrifice, sometimes known as DS, which has a cooldown of 20 seconds and a cost of 15. It targets a self and applies Divine Shield for 5 seconds. This causes you to receive all of the damage that would have been inflicted on each of your allies. Only you will take damage from both all party and multiple unit attacks, but damage received will increase with the number of targets the attacks were originally intended to hit. While this is in effect, your HP will not be reduced to 0. Devoted Sacrifice is amongst my favorite of the Rook's abilities. It's a great defensive and support ability with several applications, a few of which I will discuss here. First, and perhaps most importantly, this ability is used to protect mages who are trying to fire off an ancient spell. Since a mage can't use an ancient spell if they take so much as a single boop of damage during a 3-second period after they initiate the spell, a Rook could use Devoted Sacrifice in order to make it impossible for their mage friends to take damage while utilizing ancient spell, allowing them to use it to full effect 100% of the time, as long as both players time their abilities accurately. This is pretty amazing when one considers Ancient Spell's damage output potential. Another use for Devoted Sacrifice is when a cleric's been running ragged trying to keep your team alive and just needs a little breather. It's basically a 5-second break that allows a cleric or other healer on your team to catch their breath, heal whomever they need, and then focus their healing abilities on one person as opposed to a team of people. So you're bound to take a load of damage while Devoted Sacrifice is in effect, especially in PvP settings in which you are facing active players. It's important to have a cleric who can heal you during or just after its use, or some sort of ability to counteract the dark side of Devoted Sacrifice's blade. You could also bring a monster with healing abilities, but they're harder to pull out at a moment's notice, so I wouldn't suggest you depend on this method. In sum, be mindful of the amount of damage you're going to be taking while using this versatile ability, and have a way to counteract it, otherwise its usefulness is nullified since you're probably going to be knocked out soon after its use if you don't have any protective measures in place. Next up is White Charm, which has a cooldown of 60 seconds and a cost of 20. It applies your character's buffs to all allies with the exception of buffs that cannot be removed with balancing. To be honest, this is the only Rook ability I haven't used since they came out. There are several deterrents which have kept me from using this ability in any of my sets. First, White Charm has a high cooldown of 60 seconds and fairly high cost of 20. Second, its effects are only beneficial in a very narrow set of circumstances compared to other abilities in your arsenal. To make this work, your character must be buffed. Obtaining these buffs isn't particularly difficult. You could obtain them from monster effects, among other things. The problem with this ability lies predominantly in the second half of its description, the bit in the parentheses, with the exception of buffs that cannot be removed with balancing. Balancing removes buffs from its target or targets. Buffs include things such as stat increases and increases to one's status ailment resistance. Thus, balancing's effect excludes anything that isn't a regular buff, like special status buffs such as Frenzy and Elevation. This means White Charm can't pass on some of the best buffs in the game to your friends, which I imagine was done for balancing purposes, but is still kind of disappointing. Furthermore, regular buffs have a cap. This can be raised slightly by certain effects, such as those found in a monster's abilities, but the cap remains. So this ability is only so helpful because it is limited by both its inability to pass on special buffs as well as the caps placed on regular buffs. I didn't mention this previously, but buffs can be cleared by various abilities, especially those found on monsters, and are temporary in nature, which compounds the problems raised in the 2 points I mentioned previously. Furthermore, White Charm's completely useless if one isn't buffed, so I've counted this one out and opted for some other options. Next up is Protection of Faith, which has a cooldown of 10 seconds and a cost of 13. It has an ability power of 120 and deals physical damage that uses both physical and magical defense to one enemy twice. It has an added effect. It recovers 20% of your HP. It also has a combo effect. When used after Balance of Life, which I'll discuss in a bit, it increases the recovering percentage of the additional effect to 30%, a 10% increase over the non-combo version. I like this ability because it deals a modest amount of damage to your enemies. However, it is tempered by its lack of penetrating abilities, but works well with a Rook's traditional or intended build. It's also a good choice to counteract the effects of Devoted Sacrifice, assuming you have it equipped and in assisting with your ability to carry out your main function as a tank. Since you'll be healing yourself, it'll make you more capable of surviving the vast amount of damage you'll be taking and should be absorbing to protect your teammates. I also appreciate its combo effect since it provides a small boost to this ability's healing capabilities, which in turn boosts your ability to carry out the Rook's main function as a tank and support class. Then came Balance of Life, which has a cooldown of 10 seconds and a cost of 15. It has an ability power of 120 and deals magic damage that uses both physical and magical defense to one enemy twice. It has an added effect. It recovers the HP of all allies excluding yourself for 10% of their max HP. It has a combo effect. When used after Protection of Faith, it increases the recovery percentage of the additional effect to 20%, a 10% increase over the non-combo version. Balance of Life is basically a combination of a basic DPS attack and a cleric's mend, although it doesn't heal yourself the way mend does. Even so, it's still a good ability because it has a median cost and cooldown and deals a moderate amount of damage to your enemies. However, it is tempered by its lack of penetrating abilities, but works well with a Rook's traditional or intended build. Although it's not a good choice for counteracting the effects of Devoted Sacrifice the way Protection of Faith is, it is helpful in the sense that it could take a bit of pressure off a struggling cleric and or help keep your team alive if there isn't a healer in your party. This may be particularly helpful in the case of a team of newer players who may not have the best gear to get the most out of their healing abilities, because this ability always heals a set amount of HP, which could be increased when used in combination with Protection of Faith. The last ability in the Rook's first ring is Blunt Stun, which has a cooldown of 6 seconds and a cost of 10. It has an ability power of 180 and deals physical damage to one enemy. It has an added effect. It stuns a target with a success value of 60. When stunned, a player will be unable to activate their next ability. To make things clearer, the next ability they try to use will be cancelled out. Their ability cost will not be consumed. Stun clears after a single use. Blunt Stun is wonderful in the sense that it has both a low cost and cooldown and the highest ability power of any of the Rook's abilities. However, the ability's damage output potential is tempered by both its lack of penetrating capabilities and damage output being determined by more traditional means. This would only be detrimental in the case of tank builds, which emphasize defensive stats and gear over offensive stats and gear. Its power is also tempered by the fact that it only hits a single target once, and its added effect has a 40% chance of missing its target. Furthermore, stunned is arguably the most easily countered status ailment. A cleric can easily clear it with one of their abilities, a monster's abilities could clear it, you could fail to use a single ability to clear it, etc. So while not a terrible move, Blunt Stun is outshone by many of the other abilities available in the game. And that concludes my Unison League Rook's Guide Part 1. Part 2 will be posted next week and discuss the class's second ring. I hope you found my guide helpful and feel better prepared to play Unison League. I wish you all the best of luck and thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell so you'll know what's up. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help and we'll be adding more class guides over time to continue to expand your breadth of knowledge. Happy gaming, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye guys!